In this video, we're going to show you to install the rear lower control arm on your Dodge Charger located behind your rear wheels. Using a 22mm socket, loosen and remove the lug nuts. Grab the wheel and remove it, set it aside. On the lower portion of our control arm, we have our shock nut and bolt here. We're going to use an 18mm socket on the nut side and a 15 on the bolt side. Loosen and remove this. So our control arm comes over and connects to the back side of the knuckle here. Now there's a bolt that goes through horizontally. On the front side over here is a number 12 Allen. So we're gonna hook that up with our ratchet. Over here is a 21mm. Now we're not going to remove this bolt. We just want to go ahead and we're gonna keep the bolt in. We can go ahead and remove the nut at this point, and we're gonna use our impact gun. Let's go ahead and do that. Remove that Allen key, keep that bolt in there. We have our pole jack set up here, and what we're going to do is we're going to support our control arm here as well as the coil spring. The coil spring is going to have downward pressure on this control arm. So we're going to go ahead and raise this up and just support it. We're not lifting the car. Now what we want to do is we want to focus on this bolt right here. This is the inward bolt for the control arm. So we want to go ahead, loosen and remove this nut here, and then we'll work that bolt out. We're going to use our 18mm swivel here and a 15mm on the other side. Now at this point here, if you take that wrench and you turn it, that bolt is a little bit stuck. So we're going to go ahead and raise our jack while we're turning this bolt back and forth. And it should get to a point where it somewhat starts to free it up a little bit. I might have to go back and forth a couple times to feel that. I'm going to throw our nut back on here. We're also going to use a 15mm gear wrench on this. And we're going to use our rubber mallet and work this bolt out. Now at this point, I'm just going to unthread it. Remove that nut. Now you're going to notice that as you're removing the bolt, it's going to interfere with the exhaust. And we did that on purpose. We just want to get that bolt free and know that it's going to come out without any sort of binding or rust issues there. The next step is we want to go ahead and drop this portion of the exhaust so we can get that bolt out the rest of the way. On the back side of our muffler here, there's going to be a rubber hanger, and then there's a 13mm bolt right up top. We're going to use our swivel socket and our extension to go ahead and get to that. Loosen and remove that. And once you get that one out, you're going to follow that muffler right to the back, right above the tip of that muffler. There's going to be a second hanger. You're going to do the same thing there. Now right after our flange here, if you follow back, there's a rubber hanger. We're going to use a pry bar up against the exhaust and work that rubber hanger off. So at this point, we went ahead and adjusted our pole jack here. By looking in on the other side, you can identify, make sure that the control arm is not dragging on the threads on the bolt itself. Right now our bolt is just kind of stuck in the control arm bushings or in the bushing on the subframe itself. So we're going to use our pry bar, and we're just going to tap this gently. Work that bolt out. Now you want to go ahead and just kind of pull on that exhaust just a little bit. You do have a donut flange a little bit further up underneath that'll flex a little bit on. So we're going to install our 15mm socket and swivel on the other side here with our extension and take this out. Now we're going to slowly lower our pole jack, and what we're doing is we're taking the tension off of the coil spring up above. And this is why we keep that outward bolt attached to the knuckle. The coil spring tension has now been released. It's free floating inside of our control arm here. Take that coil spring if you want and slide that out. With the coil spring removed, we can now focus on the outward bolt. Slide that big bolt out, grab that control arm, you can wiggle that free. You might have to use your pry bar to get it out of there. Just want to separate that from the knuckle. Might have to give it a couple of whacks just to break the corrosion free from the control arm to the knuckle itself. There it comes. We do want to go ahead and pull this coil spring spacer out when you do insert it into the new one. So you definitely want to take note on the position of where the spring stop seat is. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to use our flathead screwdriver here to just kind of break the spring spacer free. Now you do want to go ahead and inspect this here, make sure that's in good condition. If it's torn, flat, split, anything like that, you do want to go ahead and replace this at the same time. Just going to swap this over, and it pretty much lines itself up on this particular model. Just push that down inside, and I'm just going to use my screwdriver just to kind of work this down inside. Another little tip here is when you go to install the spring, go ahead and spray some spray lube right inside here. That'll actually help that spring just kind of pop into the slot nice and easy without you having to fiddle around with it and try and get that to seat properly. We can go ahead and raise this up and get it installed. Line up that control arm. Work that into place. Now I want to get a bolt lined up. Now that we have our bolt through, Go ahead and put the nut on the back side. I'm just going to get that nut started. Let's go ahead and get that coil spring set up in place. Raise that spring up into position. Get that put into the body. We're going to position the tail of our spring into the notch on our control arm and raise this up into position. Make sure that that falls into place. So we set our coil spring into the lower control arm, made sure that the tail was all the way over and that our spring itself was lined up with the split on the top here. So we have our pull jack underneath. I'm going to raise the coil spring up, make sure that the upper portion of the spring is in the spring pocket. So as we raise this up in a position, we need to put the bolt in through the back side. So go ahead and light up the back, get that bolt lined up into the control arm and into the subframe bushing. In order to manipulate the control arm holes to line up with the subframe here, you can sometimes put a screwdriver or a alternate pry tool in here to try and move this around a little bit to get this to line up. Now we have our bolt all the way through to the outer edge here of the control arm. So we can go ahead and lower this. We're going to go ahead and reposition our pull jack, and we just need to manipulate the knuckle itself to swing that over. Our bolt isn't lining up with the control arm hole at this point, so what we did was we put our jack underneath the knuckle itself, and we're going to raise the suspension up. Let's go ahead and jack that up a bit. And what's happening is it's going to start to move that suspension upward and back a little bit. It's going to make it easier for us to line up the bolt hole on the control arm. Now if we take a pry bar and we put it right inside the hole here and we gently lift up, you can see that the bolt is a lot closer than it was before. So I'm going to continue to raise up the suspension. Before we tighten and torque down the outer bolt as well as the inner bolt, we need to compress our suspension to a neutral ride height, which means if we had this vehicle on the ground on its tires and the suspension was compressed, that is our neutral ride height. So we're going to use our jack. We're going to raise this up until our vehicle just starts to move off of our lift. Right there. Tells us that my suspension is compressed. I'm just going to snug down the outer bolt. Torque this down to 70 foot-pounds. Torque down the outer bolt to 70 foot-pounds. Once we have these torqued, we can now go ahead and lower our jack. We're going to spray a little bit of solvent inside the rubber grommet and push our exhaust back up onto this. Okay, put your bolt up through the hanger, line that up. We're going to push up on our exhaust. Tighten that down. Let's go ahead and install the rearward bolt. Make sure both of those bolts are good and tight. Now we're going to put our pole jack underneath the control arm here. We're going to lift it up just a little bit. Now if you reach up and grab that shock, you can swing this over. You can see where we need to line up for that hole. Now I'm going to put the bolt through the front. I might have to move that around a little bit. And you might have to lower that jack just to get that to line up and come through. Once that's through, we can go ahead and lower our jack. Let's go ahead and tighten that down. Torque down the lower bolt here to 96 foot-pounds. Go ahead and grab your wheel. Set that into place. I'm going to go ahead and install all of our lug nuts. Thread them all, and then we'll go ahead and snug them down. Torque down your lug nuts to 130 foot-pounds. We're going to do this in a crisscross pattern.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.